Shadow Secretary of State for Energy, Security and Net Zero. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Let's talk about Grenfell, should we? Pretty damning about your government, previous government.
Well, look, it was a shocking report. There was details going back, I think, to the early 90s. And everybody who was involved, I think it's really important that we learn the lessons. I want to see it all dealt with honesty and transparency, so we do get the accountability that we need.
Yeah, but the previous government, your government, has to accept some responsibilities. Angela Rayner was sat there in the last hour and she totally accepted that a previous Labour government just didn't do enough.
Well, you know, if you saw the former Prime Minister, now leader of the opposition yesterday, he made a heartfelt apology to the families, which I think is right, because if you look at that report, there were failures across the board, and it wasn't any sort of one person or one government, but it is really important that everybody who has any accountability is taking responsibility. And ultimately, the most important thing is that we are getting justice for families and making sure that the system works.
Yeah, only 12% of buildings across the country with flammable cladding have had it removed 7 years on from the tragedy. That's down to your previous government. Why didn't you work quicker?
Well, so I know, you know, there was £5 billion, I think, that went into remediation, and where they focused their attention was on the highest risk buildings. They started with the really high towers, which were deemed the most unsafe. And out of those, I think there was about 500 of them, and 98% of them have either had their work completed or started. But there is definitely more to do. And like I said, I think the really important thing is that we're all working together. And we've said as the opposition that we'll work constructively with Labour to pick up the work that was initially started by Theresa May after the tragedy, with the inquiry and all of the different acts and regulations and things that have changed since, to make sure that we can get this all done as quickly as possible. Should
the people responsible face jail?
Well, I don't think anyone should be exempt from accountability. And like I said, there was lots of things that were talked about in that report. There was, you know, officials, departments, ministers, regulators, the building contractors themselves. And with all of these things, what you want is a system which gets safety right and also has that accountability. So where you've got regulation in place, for example, people are building to those standards. So I do think there was a lot to learn from that report. It was incredibly detailed. And like I said, we'll be working with the current government to make sure that we can take it forward.
So that's a yes?
Well, I don't think anybody should be exempt. And I think it is right that we look at everybody who was involved and make sure that accountability is there.
OK. Priti Patel lost yesterday. Was that a surprise?
Well, you know, there's not that many of us anymore, so all of it is very tight, actually. You look at those numbers, they were all quite close. So we'll have to see what happens with the leadership. But what I would say is, actually, I think over the summer, I was pleased that there wasn't that sort of infighting and backbiting that we'd seen in the past. I think everybody was sick of that, frankly, from the Conservatives, and people have been talking about ideas. And I think that is credit to all of the different leadership contenders.
You're supporting Kemi Badenoch, I think, aren't you? Why do you think she's going to beat Jenrick? Because he's top of the shop at the moment.
Yes, although I think there was, I can't remember exactly, but about 7 people in it. So, you know, it could, let's see what happens. We're going down to 4 now, so we've got another vote next week. But the reason that I like Kemi is that I think people are slightly fed up of politics in general for lots of different reasons. And she is, I think, quite fresh in how she approaches politics. She's very sort of courageous in the things that she takes on. She's fearless when it comes to telling the truth about different things and taking on things and fighting in the public's interests. And that's what I like about her, because not just here in the UK, but across the West and Europe, in different parts of the world, we are seeing all of these new challenges. And I like the fact that Kemi is very modern, very future-looking. She's an engineer, she likes analysis, and she really wants to get to grips with those problems and make sure that we as Conservatives are putting forward the best ideas.
You say that the Conservative Party is much more united in its leadership challenges than we've seen previously. Something that divides the party is leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. Where are you on that?
So I think what unites the party is that we all want to deal with immigration. And if we're, you know, I think we've all been pretty honest that one of the things that people saw as a government failure previously is that we couldn't get to grips with particularly illegal immigration, but also legal migration as well. And that's what we all want to see changed. And again, you know, I think what Kemi has said is, you know, we might have to leave the ECHR. Maybe that's necessary, but it might not be sufficient. And what she wants to do, and I think, you know, actually lots of us want to do, is make sure that we solve the problem, that we achieve the objective, that we can deliver on the things that we've been promising the public, which is to get immigration right.
And you're happy to be in a club who the only other members are Russia and Belarus?
Well, there's lots of countries around the world which are members of the ECHR, not just Russia and Belarus. And like I said, the most important thing for me is that we can deliver what the public wants. And the public very clearly wants, and all of us want, us to be able to tackle immigration. And you particularly see with illegal immigration this strong sense that it's completely unfair. People are jumping the queue. They're putting a lot of pressure on public services in a way that we can't manage. And from my perspective, I was children's minister in the former government. And so I could see the effect of that on the children's social care system, which is the most vulnerable children in society. So what I think is really important is that we have all the levers to make sure that we can tackle the problem.
OK, let me ask you about scrapping benefits as far as heating, lighting is concerned for 10 million pensioners. Kemi Badenoch, who you support, said 2 years ago that the payments should stop for rich pensioners. We're hearing something very different from the present leader now. Where are you on that?
Well, look, I think it's been a complete false equivalence, because what Kemi said is that, you know, rich pensioners, if you're a millionaire, can we find a system so that means that they don't get the winter fuel allowance? Very few of us would disagree with that. But what Labour have done is very different. They're taking the winter fuel payment away from pensioners who are in poverty. 2/3 of the pensioners who are in poverty are going to lose out this winter. And not only are they doing that, but they're doing that without giving anyone forward notice. I think Angela Rayner was on your show saying they only decided that after they came into power. But this was the first time in 14 years that they didn't pledge to protect the winter fuel payment in their manifesto. They did it in 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019, but not this time. And that's because I'm pretty sure they had these conversations before. This idea that they just came in and then decided to do it doesn't stack up. And the reason that's important is you've got these people who are on fixed incomes. And like I said, lots of people who are in poverty, who are going to face a lot of difficulties this winter, who haven't had time to prepare. And they would have heard from Ed Miliband, who's my counterpart on energy, that he was going to save them £300 on their energy bills. And instead, that's all being taken away. And that's what I think is so deeply wrong.
That's an interesting manifesto point, which I didn't know, and I'll be using next time I have somebody from Labour on. What do you think about the criticism of Angela Rayner in Ibiza when she was on holiday?
Well, you know, when it comes to bad dancing, I've got to be honest, I've got no legs to stand on here. I've got no credibility on this issue. Personally, I'm all for bad dancing. I think there should be more of it. And I'm not really interested in politicians and their dancing. What I care about is what they do. So that's
But what
the
about
thing.
the criticism of, you know, women get a harder time in politics, it's a fact. And, you know, she's on holiday, she's letting her hair down, and yet she's all over the papers being criticised for actually being on holiday.
Well, look, I think what we should criticise Angela Rayner for is the fact that, you know, a few years ago,
I'm giving
she
you the
was
opportunity
saying,
to support another female politician.
well, yeah, that's the thing. I'm not going to take the opportunity to criticise her dancing. But what I will criticise her for is 2 years ago, she was saying she was fully for the winter fuel payment. And now she's come into government, she's taken a completely different view, and she cannot explain why she thinks that it should be taken away from pensioners in poverty. That's the important thing. That's what we should be holding her to account for.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, she's a female politician. She gets more scrutiny than male politicians. She gets criticised for going on holiday, even though she's perfectly entitled to. She gets criticised for what she wears walking up Downing Street. That's not fair, surely.
Oh, of course. Like, I think all of these things are, you know, slight red herrings when it comes to politics. And that's why, I mean, I don't care how politicians dance. I don't really care what they wear, to be honest. What I really care about is what they do. And that is what we as the opposition will be holding Labour to account for. And, you know, just today I've got Ed Miliband bringing forward a bill when it comes to energy. And what I'll be talking about is what he's going to do to people's bills. That's what I care about.
OK, it's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Well, the